you, Tori, for that awesome introduction and all the housekeeping notes. And a big thank you to Golden Ceramics, to Ben, and Sydney and his whole crew there. I can't say enough about this lab. At the end, we're gonna get to spend some time with Ben. We've allocated 10 minutes or so for live Q&A at the end. So we'll get to hear some of his thoughts on workflow, and he'll be able to answer any of your questions. Just an awesome guy and a great lab. So thank you. Good afternoon. I'm out in the Washington State, Seattle, Washington area. So it's morning for me. So anytime I get to do a webinar this time of the day, it's really fun. Usually they're in the evening, and I really think it's cool that everybody's here. This is like a lunch and learn, So, but I'm not here to talk to you today about a new prosthesis. And please don't leave. You're in the right presentation. The fact of the matter is that, digital dentures is just a huge buzzword for many reasons in the industry. Many of those are marketing. But the fact of the matter is, guys, that this is an acrylic denture. It's producing an acrylic denture on a 3D printer. That's what Golden Ceramics is doing here. So we're going to get into the materials. We're going to talk about the strength, the workflow, a lot of the benefits. But a lot of times with human beings, it's programmed into our DNA to fear new things and be, scared of new changes and materials in our industry. And for some of that is for good reason, right? A lot of us have been burned before for jumping on something new. We're going to talk through all that. I just want you to kind of level set and realize that this is really, it's a new way to fabricate, a different way to fabricate acrylic dentures. And it's really about the evolution of technology and our digital workflow. Let's talk about the evolution of our technology for a minute. I don't know if Elon Musk was the first person to say this. He's the first person I heard, and this was his quote, but we know this is true, right? We know how fast technology is changing our world in our personal lives and in your clinics and in our labs. And this is really just the latest evolution of our industry. So what I mean is, we all take for granted, probably, sort of, that we've largely transitioned from analog to digital workflow on the fixed side of the industry. I'm a CDT in fixed crown and bridge. And so for years and years, I was at the bench fabricating PFMs and full gold crowns using the techniques you see on the left-hand side of your screen here, waxing by hand and casting. And those techniques are still utilized in our industry today, but we have really transitioned to a digital workflow on the fixed side. I think I saw a stat the other day that something like 85% of the fixed restorations prescribed in this country every day are either full zirconia or some type of a zirconia-based restoration, right? And that's a milled digital restoration. So what's happening on the removable side of our industry now is the materials and the software and the hardware, like 3D printing hardware, has evolved to the point where now we can create removable restorations digitally. And that's really what we're here to talk about today. But if you send a prescription out into the universe today for a denture, here's really the four main ways that denture can be created. So we have the traditional manufacturing method, which is, which mostly we're all still really familiar with, which is, hand waxing, setting these teeth in wax, the wax try-in, 5 appointments if you're lucky, sometimes 6, sometimes more, to get that denture adjusted and fitted and get that patient happy. When a process goes digital, a manufacturing process goes digital in any industry, typically you'll see it go to milling first. Milling is what we call a reductive technology. It's inherently wasteful and slow because you're starting with a large mass of material and you're cutting out just the parts that you need. The rest of the material is either thrown away, maybe a portion of that is recycled. And it's not that you can't create a decent denture in a mill, you can, but it's really not that efficient. Again, because of that wasteful manufacturing process, but also it's slow because when you're milling a material, you're actually cutting it. And when you're milling a material like zirconia, it's a harder material. and you can spin that burr in that mill very fast, and you can cut that out very efficiently. But when you go to mill an acrylic, it's a softer material. And if you spin that burr very fast, you'll generate heat and you'll melt that acrylic. So what happens in a lab is the software that runs that mill has to slow that milling speed way down, and it makes it inefficient. It takes about 3 hours, 2 to 3 hours to mill one denture in a mill. And if you think about efficiency and workflow, and what that means for a clinician working with a lab, if they can keep those mills running really efficiently with materials like zirconia and other materials, then they can keep their cost of goods sold down and ultimately their price to you lower, and also, the turnaround time quicker. So, honestly, digital dentures have been milled for probably, a decade now or more. But what happened about 6-7 years ago is that you saw the first generation of 3D printed materials hit the market for dentures. It's important to pause here for a second and really designate the fact that the material that Golden Ceramics is using to print these dentures, lucitone digital print denture material from Dentsply Sirona, is vastly different from the majority of the 3D printed materials that are on the market today. Most of the 3D printed dentures on the market today are still this generation 1 material. And what I mean by that is it's not a high impact strength, and usually they lack aesthetics, natural looking aesthetics. So they have their place for maybe temporaries or immediate dentures, but for a long-term final denture solution, they're really not well suited because of their low strength. In fact, some of these materials, these denture materials, once the denture is fabricated from these generation 1 materials, if you drop it on a hard surface from 5-6 feet up, it will shatter into many pieces. And so again, it's okay, they have their uses, but really watch the marketing. And especially in clinics today, these companies, they're marketing towards dentists very hard, trying to sell the idea that creating dentures in your office is really simple, right? We know that milling crowns has been around for a long time in office, chairside, and has its challenges. It's okay for some indications, right? Dentures is a little more complex, just a little more complex. And with that more complex workflow mixed with these generation 1 materials, I just really want you to have your guard up and be careful, because companies love to sell dentist stuff, right? So moving towards this LDP, this is a product that's by Dentsply Sirona. They basically took their traditional lucitone 199 acrylic and they converted it to a 3D printed resin. The benefits are, here's the top benefits for me. There's many more than this, but these are my key benefits. Is when we think about a digital product and we say a digital denture, and this is why I really don't like the term digital denture, or digital anything in our industry, because let's face it, guys, everything's digital. If you take an analog impression and you send it to Golden Ceramics and you want a zirconia crown, it's going to be scanned and converted to a digital file to create that zirconia crown. So we're all working digitally, whether we think we're analog or not. And it's the same with dentures. You don't need to have an intraoral scanner to get a 3D printed denture from Golden Ceramics. If you have an intraoral scanner, the benefits are pretty amazing, and we're going to get into that workflow. So you can cut your appointment times way down. It's much simpler for the patient. So there's definitely some awesome ways to use an intraoral scanner with this workflow, but I don't want it to be a barrier, right? Because sometimes I have dentists, I'll talk to dentists, my older brother's a prosthodontist. He just got an intraoral scanner. He's been in business. He's had his practice for, 15 years or something like that. But we had a conversation. He goes, oh yeah, I'm really interested in digital dentures. As soon as I get my scanner, I can start to do digital dentures, because then I'll be a digital dentist. So if you have a scanner, amazing. We're going to talk about some really slick workflows. But if you don't let that be a barrier for you. Golden can convert those traditional bite records and impressions to digital and still give you these awesome dentures. Super accurate. You can do Google searches now. Many independent studies, universities and other are doing studies showing that 3D printed dentures are the best fitting dentures in the world, better than even milled digital dentures and much better than analog dentures. A digital record is probably my favorite benefit. If you think about the traditional denture workflow and how many appointments it takes to create an analog traditional denture. And then, something happens to that denture. The patient wraps it up in a napkin and throws it away. It breaks, gets ran over by their tractor, many different ways. Dog eats it. It's kind of funny if there's some stories we could all share about how we heard, about dentures being destroyed. But what's not funny is the fact that with that analog denture, you're starting back over from an initial impression, and you're going back through all those steps again. With this denture from Golden Ceramics, they store the digital file. So when they create this denture for you, they store that file for free. And if something happens to that patient's denture, patient doesn't even have to come into the clinic. You can call Golden Ceramics. They'll pull up the file that they have stored for you for free. They'll reprint the denture and they'll send it to you or send it to the patient. We can talk about that in the Q&A. Ben can get into some of those specifics with you. But the fact of the matter is, what an amazing benefit to know that that patient's record is backed up and stored for you. Especially impactful in the demographic of patients that's elderly in convalescent care facilities, because we know these patients are unfortunately, it's most common for them to lose or damage their denture. And we know how rapidly their health declines when that happens. Some of these patients also are in, pretty bad physical shape, and they need special transportation to get back and forth from, where they're staying to the clinic. Some of them need special medications for these appointments. So to go through all those steps and all that hassle, and then something happens to the denture and they have to redo it, this digital record is just a game changer. So you can tell I'm passionate about it, but it's pretty amazing. Efficiency, if you have an intraoral scanner, you can do dentures in as few as 2 to 3 clinical appointments. And we're going to talk through that workflow. I know it sounds, if you're not doing these already, that sounds like, it doesn't sound realistic, but we're going to show you why and how that's possible. And the other thing we want to talk about too is when we're talking about a new concept for a material or a process, we want to make sure we can trust it. By the end of this year, just on carbon printers, the company I work for, Carbon, makes these 3D printers that produce these dentures. By the end of the year, we'll have 500,000 dentures in patients' mouths just from our customers' printers. And this material's been on the market for 5 years. So you don't have to worry about being a guinea pig. Like if we talk about the adoption curve and the learning curve, there's the early adopters that would have been 5 years ago, just jumping in with both feet, right? And 5 years in, 500,000 dentures in the mouth, we're really approaching the middle of that adoption curve. And that's why we're seeing now with more of these in the market, more dentists are learning about the benefits from their peers and from classes they take. And we're just seeing adoption just take off. So trusted. Strength, another amazing benefit. When Dentsply converted traditional lucitone 199 to this 3D printed resin, an amazing side effect happened that they didn't anticipate. But when they were, in their testing processes, they realized that when this material is warmed up to body temperature in a patient's mouth, the work of fracture rating doubles. I'll show you some strength stats here. This is at room temperature. So this is, you can see the lucitone digital print, the lucitone HIPAA material, and then the traditional lucitone 199, all at room temperature. You can see that the flexural strength and the flexural modulus and work of fracture are all pretty similar at room temperature, which that alone would be very trustworthy, right? You'd say, okay, well, so this material is just as strong as traditional lucitone 199. There's 500,000 in the mouth. It's been out for 5 years. Great. Again, high impact strength. Remember the differentiation between most of the denture resins on the market today that you see being marketed, and then this Dentsply product. But look what happens when you warm it up to body temperature. Right here in a patient's mouth, you can see that the work of fracture doubles to 3,000 joules per meter squared versus around 1,500. So it's incredibly strong when it's in a patient's mouth. We'll talk through some of the assembly and some of the fabrication processes later, and I'll show you how the teeth are bonded into the base and things like that as well. All incredibly strong. It also has amazing flexural modulus. So that's the ability to reduce or to resist breaking or fracturing from bending. Look at that. That's on an Instro machine. If you tried to do that with a traditional acrylic, lucitone 199 denture, because it doesn't have that same flexural modulus, it would snap within the first couple millimeters of deflection. So just a really, really robust material. Here's just one of those studies. Again, please be my guest, do your own Google search and find other studies. But here's one, if you want to screenshot this or take a look at this, this is a pretty cool study that shows the comparison of fit and the accuracy of 3D printed versus milled digital dentures. So let's talk a little bit about what's happening in our industry today and why we're in this position where this is so impactful for us. Because the fact of the matter is, our friends at the American College of Prosthodontists tell us that there's more than 36 million Americans currently that are fully edentulous. They don't have any teeth, and 120 million or more that are missing at least one tooth. And those numbers are expected to grow pretty dramatically. They're thinking in the next decade or so, we're going to have 200 million individuals in this country alone that are missing at least one tooth. Now, another interesting fact is that about 15% of the fully edentulous population has at least one arch of dentures made each year. So if you do the quick math on that, 36 million Americans, 15% of that, that's almost 5.5 million denture prescriptions per year coming into labs in the US. That's a lot of dentures. If we take a look at the lab side of the industry, we've really got some issues happening with our workforce, and that's being that we have an aging demographic of removable technicians. 60% of all techs are over the age of 55, and only about a quarter of them are listed as the most experienced removable techs in our industry versus the least experienced. We don't have as many dental lab schools and vocational programs as we used to. A lot of those have closed down. So we don't have a fresh crop of removable technicians, pouring into the industry every year that can be grabbed by labs. So what labs are able to do is they're able to take their experienced removable technicians and they're able to, train them into the digital workflow to design dentures digitally and fabricate these. And because it's a more efficient process, we're also able to, keep up with this staggering workflow. But can you imagine the issue we would have in this country for patient care if we didn't have this transition to the digital workflow in the removable side of the industry like we've had in the fixed side with the shortage of technicians and then this growing demographic of patients in need. 3D printing in dental labs is really highly adopted now. Just 5-6 years ago, labs were still kind of trying to make 3D printing work. The number of products that you could print and the materials were very limited, but we've had a real increase in the robustness of the hardware and the comprehensiveness of the software, and then these amazing materials that have been developed to allow that to all come together and have 3D printing really adoption really take off in dental labs. So we're going to level set really quickly on 3D printing. This is not a deep dive, but it's interesting because this is how these dentures are fabricated, and it's important to realize, well, if we're converting a traditional process to digital, we're taking an acrylic and now we're producing on a printer, how does that work? So I'm just going to go into a little bit of an overview here of 3D printing. Lots of different types of 3D printers in the world today. We hear stories about, all types of products that are 3D printed. You read a story about, hey, there was a bridge 3D printed in Europe. And, so lots of different, ways that you can quote unquote, 3D print something. But most of the 3D printers and the processes in our industry, the dental industry today, are this category on the right here that you see, the DLP and the DLS printers. How those printers work in a nutshell is you have a piece of glass. That piece of glass forms a vat that you put resin into. There's a light source underneath the glass, and there's a build platform that lowers down into that vat of resin. When you design, I have a denture here. This is a lucitone digital print denture. When you design this denture in the software, that's the CAD process. You hear of CAD CAM. So you have your CAD process. You get it designed. The CAM software then takes this design that you've created and it slices it up into a bunch of little thin layers. Then that software plays each one of those layers through that UV light source through the glass. That glass or that UV light interacts with the resin and it partially cures it. So it makes it a partially cured, instead of a liquid resin, it makes it a partially cured layer of this part. So Part plays via the light through the glass. Resin partially, that thin layer partially cures to the glass. The build platform pulls that partially cured layer off the glass. New resin flows underneath. Next layer of the part, next slice of the part is played via the light, partially cures, build platform pulls it off, and you do this over and over again, and you eventually have a part. That's how 3D printing works traditionally. The printers that Golden Ceramics are using, that my company Carbon produces, work a little differently. The co-founders of our company realized that while UV light will partially cure the resin to the glass, if you inject oxygen into the process, you'll inhibit that partial curing of resin to the glass while still partially curing the resin. What that means is that you don't have the resin sticking to the glass, and you're not pulling that off the build platform while new resin flows underneath. New resin is continuously able to flow underneath the part as you pull the build platform off the glass, because we pump oxygen in between two very special pieces of glass, and it creates what's called a dead zone right at the surface of the glass. You go, dead zone sounds awful. Like, I don't want anything to do with a dead zone, but actually that's where all the magic happens, because that resin can't cure to the glass. So if you think about every time you pull parts of the cured resin off a piece of glass, you're also taking a very, very microscopically thin layer of that glass off. Over time, that will degrade the build platform and will affect the accuracy of the parts. That doesn't happen with our printers. What also happens with our printers is that you get parts that are created with different mechanical properties. So you can see here under magnification, a traditionally fabricated 3D printed part, and this could be anything, right? This could be a denture, this could be a night guard, these amazing appliances that Golden produces. You can see it's like a horizontal build profile. It's very like a wafer cookie almost. And on the left-hand side of your screen, you can see that how you orient that part in the software will also affect the final strength of the material that you're printing. And with the carbon parts that Golden Ceramics is printing, these dentures, you can see that the build profile and the grain structure is very different. It's almost like a 45-degree angle, very tight grain profile, and the strength is not affected. How you orient the part it doesn't affect the strength. So it's a completely different 3D printing process that produces parts that are more dense, that are smoother, and just a more efficient process. You can also produce some pretty interesting structures on this type of 3D printer, like this lattice structure that you see. Lattice is a very interesting structure because it's all these little individual struts that can be programmed for thickness and length. And you can create some products, and some companies are using the same printers that Golden is using to produce some pretty interesting products, like for consumers. So here you have Adidas is using these, are the same printers that Golden has to produce these custom printed midsoles on these Adidas 4D Forward shoes. You can actually, these are available off the shelf. You can get them at Dick's Sporting Goods, and you can go to the Adidas website and buy them, and they just have a standard version. But you can also, there are certain Adidas stores where you can scan a runner's foot, and then you can create a custom tuned 3D printed lattice midsole that could give you more support in the insole or correct, different arch issues that you're having. So pretty cool. Football season's here. Pay attention on the close-ups on the players if you're watching football this weekend, and you'll start to see that you're not seeing foam in as many of these helmets anymore. Rydell, and there's a company called Visic that are using these same printers that Golden has to produce these custom helmets that fit a player's head much better. You put a reflective hood on, scan a player's head, and then you produce these lattice parts that fit inside the helmet and fit the player's head intimately. Much better impact absorption. These are some of the safest rated helmets in the NFL today. So we know concussions are a major issue. So again, pretty interesting way that 3D printers are being used to improve, consumer parts. Any cyclists on the call? A company called Specialized and another company called Physique and a couple others are using the same printer that Golden has to produce these custom tuned bike seats. There's a scanning process for a runner's foot. There's a scanning process for an NFL player's head. There actually is a scanning process for a bike seat. I don't know exactly what that is, but you don't have to undergo that if you don't want to. You can just buy the off-the-shelf version. But studies are showing this is a much healthier bike seat because it's relieving pressure points and helping blood flow, and just also a more comfortable seat. Rawlings, the baseball glove company, using the same printer that the Golden team has to produce these more lighter weight and more impact absorbent baseball gloves. A little company called Ford, another company called Lamborghini are using it to do parts on 3D printed vehicles. So interesting to see all the different companies that are using the same technology, the same printer that Golden Ceramics is. They're really in a different category of dental labs, as you can probably tell by now. But what I'm really most excited about is how 3D printers are being used in healthcare. So there's companies like Johnson & Johnson and Pfizer and Moderna that are household names now to us that are really looking at 3D printing to produce interesting applications for a patient. So you think about a material that could be bioabsorbed and dissolve and pass through the body without a trace. So maybe like a heart stent, for example. Instead of an alloy heart stent or some other type of a composite that stays in the patient's body, they're researching and testing ways to 3D print parts like a heart stent that could stay in the patient's body until that artery is healed and formed, and then dissolve and pass through the body without a trace and not stay in the patient's body. Also, drug delivery. This is really interesting. If anybody's heard about microneedles, but you can 3D print these little small patches of needles. And again, they're looking at doing them with a dissolvable tip where it could, break off, stay under the patient's dermis layer, and then distribute the medication, and then just dissolve and pass through the body without a trace. But here's an actual 3D printed patch of microneedles at University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, where they have the same printer that Golden Ceramics has, and they're working with those companies, those pharmaceutical companies. And the goal and the strategy is that this is how we could vaccinate in the future potentially, because you could coat these microneedles with a vaccine. And they're researching that when you take a needle and vaccinate somebody and you put it in the fatty tissue and you inject that vaccine, you get an immune response. But when you take microneedles and you just vaccinate and you inject that medicine just under the layer of the dermis, you get a higher immune response than if you go deeper into the fatty tissue. They're also testing if you go into the mouth and you go into the mucosa, you get even a higher immune response than if you go under the layer of the dermis, and much higher than if you go into the fatty tissue. Not only that, think about the training that it takes to train somebody to give a shot, right? You don't want to be putting a needle into an artery or a vein. So in the future, could we possibly vaccinate ourselves? Because could a shipment of these little microneedles show up at our house in a refrigerated or cooled container? You take it out, go like this, and you're vaccinated. Now, I don't know if that's going to be possible, but that is what they're researching. So interesting ways that 3D printing are being used in the world today. And what you see on the screen here, Golden Ceramics can use their printer to print any of these products that you see here today. So we're talking about dentures, but it's interesting to know that they print amazingly accurate surgical guides, castable materials, night guards and bite splints, and very accurate models. So many applications can now be moved from analog to digital workflow with their 3D printer. Let's talk about that workflow for dentures. So again, if you have an intraoral scanner, amazing. We're going to look at that in just a minute. We're going to show you some unique workflows that how you can utilize your intraoral scanners. But if you don't have an intraoral scanner, then essentially what happens is the steps that happen up to the bite block. We're going to do the initial impression, custom tray, final impression, and then the wax rims or the bite blocks. But from that stage, so nothing changes for you clinically. You don't have to do any different steps. But what Golden Ceramics is going to do with those wax rims or those bite blocks is they're not going to create a wax try-in. What they're going to do at that point is they're going to scan those bite blocks, and they're going to convert them to a digital file that they're then going to use to design a try-in. And if you haven't been to the lab for a while and you haven't seen this amazing software that they have to design these dentures, it's very comprehensive. So any of the tools that a technician has at the bench to use with their hands to hand fabricate a denture, they also have in the software. So there's the ability to take the dentures and set them up on virtual articulators. There's an articulator library. You run them through excursions just like you would at the bench. You can set the condyles, all that, all those settings, wax knives, sculpting tools. So they can create the occlusal setup, however you want those dentures set up, they have the ability to do that. This is, to me, one of the more exciting pieces of this as well, is the fact that the try-in process is vastly improved. So when you do a try-in with Golden Ceramics, you no longer have this wax try-in where you have to wiggle the teeth around and spend your time, kind of fine-tuning this. And what we talk about a lot when we move a process from analog to digital is the fact that there's so many steps in that analog denture process. There's so much room for error to creep in. I have some friends that are engineers and they talk to me about copy error. And if any of you have an engineering background or you have friends that are engineers and you've talked about this with them before, you're familiar with that term. But essentially what it is the more steps you have in a production process, the more room for copy error to sneak in. And that's what we see with a wax try-in process, to me, right? Because we've been doing these dentures this way for 80 or 90 years, we just accept that a wax try-in is a necessary part of this. And it's really not. Just because that's the way it's been doesn't mean there's not a better way. And we actually have found that now with this try-in. So it's a monolithic try-in. You don't move the teeth around in wax. What you do is you just try it in the patient's mouth. It's a functional try-in. This is the same material that the denture base and teeth are. You can see that it's a shade of the teeth. It's not two-tone. But what happens is this is a functional try-in. So if you want to test the phonetics, if you want to test the occlusion, the patient can take this home and try it for a couple of days. You can never do that with a wax try-in, right? That wax try-in, you can barely put it in a patient's mouth. You have to be very careful with it as it is. This is a functional try-in. Patients can take it home and try it. It's very easy to indicate changes if required. So, a lot of dentists will look at this and say, okay, well, what if something's wrong? What if I need changes made? What if I do need that midline moved over? I'm going to show you how easy it is to reflect those changes for the lab. It feels like the final denture. And that's another benefit, right? Because a wax try-in it's wax rims. It's not what the final denture feels like. This is the same material. So the fit and the suction and the overall feel of this is going to be identical to the final denture for the patient. Also, this can be delivered with the final denture as an emergency backup. Again, these dentures have been on the market for 5 years. We have a lot of research from labs, Golden Ceramics and other labs that tell us that there's a reduced incidence of changes happening from the try-in to the final denture. Because of that very efficient design process, because we're eliminating all those steps of fabrication to get to the wax try-in stage, these dentures, the fact of the matter is they just fit better, and the try-in process is actually more accurate. So we're not seeing the need to make changes from the try-in as many times or as often as we are with a wax try-in. But if you want to make changes or reflect some changes at that try-in, it's so simple. So you just take a little Sharpie and you can just mark right on that try-in, like you see here on the screen. Please move the midline over to where it's indicated. Midline's a little off. This is an acrylic, so acrylic will stick to this. So you can add acrylic or you can add wax if you want to say, hey, can you please bring the incisal edge down, a little bit, like I indicated on number 7 with the wax that I added. You could say you can make changes to the gingival anatomy. You can, if the phonetics are off, you can adjust that. If the occlusion's off, you can grind on this. If for some reason the impression didn't accurately capture the tissue in the bone, you can do a wash impression in this try-in. And then you can send that back to Golden. And what they're going to do is they're actually going to scan the try-in and they're going to overlay that against their initial design. And they can make the changes right in the software that simply. So you have all the same opportunities to make changes and to control the outcome of the final denture, but without having to, wiggle teeth around and worry about the fact that, is this wax try-in going to get to you intact no matter how carefully they pack it up and ship it to you, how many times have you opened up a box with a wax try-in and it sat in the back of a UPS truck or a delivery car or something, and it was hot and the wax melted a little bit, and now we have an inaccurate try-in, has to go back to the lab to be fixed. So those days are eliminated with this process. If you have any questions about the try-in process, please either put them in the chat box or any questions about anything that you've seen or heard so far, and we're going to address those and answer your questions here in about 10 minutes with Ben. So after we're going to switch now back to the lab. So after you send your try-in, you do your try-in process, and you send the try-in back to Golden Ceramics. What they're going to do is they're going to actually print those bases, and they're going to print the teeth or produce the teeth. However they decide to do that, there's different options for producing these teeth. There's actually Dentsply produces a carded tooth. There's a mill, you can mill PMMA if you want to produce the teeth that way, or you can 3D print a very durable and aesthetic tooth. Here's what it looks like when you're 3D printing those bases. This is after the printing process. These bases are adhered to the build platform with what we call supports. You can see those little pink, looks like those little pink strips. And the T-bar supports, the cross arch supports that are on these dentures, are another important little piece of the equation here, because when we're 3D printing something, there are suction and compression forces on those parts as they're 3D printing. And so what Golden does is they place these cross arch supports, we call them T-bars, on the denture bases in the CAM software before they move to the printing step. And that ensures that those dentures do not warp at all. Those bases do not warp during the printing process. So you remove these dentures from the build platform, you remove those little supports from the dentures, and you want to remove any of the uncured resin from these dentures. You do that in isopropyl alcohol. So they take these denture bases, they put them in a container with some isopropyl alcohol, shake it around. You do this a couple times. You take a swab and make sure you get all the uncured resin off, out of the sockets of the teeth, and you get them all cleaned up. The next step is you're going to fuse the teeth into the denture base. And this is another, kind of a key part of this process is we're not super gluing the teeth into the base. And a lot of dentists will ask, what is that? How's that bond of the tooth to the base? Now, when we 3D print, there's these post-processing steps we're talking about. Is one is cleaning any of the additional resin off the part. The other one is a final curing stage where you put these in a UV light box and you do the final cure. And then they're safe to be in a patient's mouth. They're safe to handle with your bare hands. But we're taking a partially cured base and we're taking a 3D printed tooth that's also partially cured. We're putting them together with the same parent resin that the base is, and then we're fusing them together in that final cure so that the bond of the tooth to the base is incredibly strong. We have labs that test this all the time. They'll take a pair of pliers and they'll try to break the tooth out of the base, and they'll basically break the tooth before they'll break the tooth out of the base. So that fuse is so strong that we have less incidence of teeth debonding from the base. We know even with traditional acrylic dentures, sometimes a denture tooth will pop out. A reduced incidence of that with this. So here's what this process looks like in the lab. So again, partially cured base and either a carded tooth, a PMMA milled tooth, or a 3D printed tooth. You can also, install the teeth in quadrants or full arches if you want to. It's kind of nice to see them being installed one by one because you can really get a good idea of what the process is like. So lab is putting some of the fused material into the socket, put the tooth into the socket, do a little tack here, make sure it's not going to wiggle around, and then continue on around the arch, installing the teeth. And again, nothing wrong with doing this, installing one full arch of teeth together or quadrants. This is what that basic process looks like. After that, they're going to move to the final cure where they put these dentures in a cure box and then they polish them up. Here's what that curing process looks like. These UV lights are specially tuned with both the UV frequency and the heat to interact with this material and give it and do the final cure. So again, after they come out of this cure box, they've reached their final strength. All the mechanical properties and material properties are achieved. And then we just move to the polishing process, which is really no different than finishing and polishing a traditional acrylic denture, although we have to just remove these T-bar supports, which you can see is very simple, just done with an acrylic burr. Zip those off, do a little bit of contouring on the denture. And then if you want to stipple the denture, anything that you would typically, any burr that you would typically use, any technique you would typically use to finish a traditional acrylic denture, you do with these. Here you can see this technician is just contouring it. Those little tiny tiny bumps that you see are where the supports were attached to the denture, where it was attached to the build platform. You can see how minor that is. This technician wanted to try stippling the denture. You can stipple the denture in the software, but for this one here, this tech just wanted to see like, hey, how does this feel? And the comments that you'll hear from experienced removable technicians are, wow, this material is incredibly dense. It just feels really solid and really dense compared to traditional acrylic. But you can see then you just take them into the polishing box, use the pumice with a bristle brush, and then use the rouge and the buffing wheel to get its final luster. And the final dentures are beautiful. I get asked a lot of times, and I'm sure Ben and his team at Golden do as well. What about relining and repairing this material? Is that possible? If I have a denture where something happens and the patient needs a quick repair, is that possible? The answer is absolutely. Just like traditional lucitone 199 dentures, you can do chairside soft relines if you want to. Dentsply recommends these materials here, the Tokiyama Soft Reliner Tough and the GS Reline 2. You can do lab hard relines. Dentsply recommends using their HIPAA material for that. And for general repairs, any cold cure acrylic can be used. Dentsply has only validated their HIPAA material, but the fact of the matter is we're not limited. Again, this is not that scary and new of a product that we can't do these reline and repair processes. Now, remember, if the denture is damaged, Golden, they do store that file for you. So typically what's going to happen is if the denture is damaged and the patient has a backup that they can pop in, maybe it's the try-in that got sent along with the final denture, or they can pop that in for a couple of days, but Golden is going to pull up that file and reproduce the denture without needing to repair it. But it's nice to know that if you need to, you can repair and reline the denture. Now, this is already kind of been spoiled, right? Imagine a day when dentures can be fabricated with only 2 clinical appointments. And then, the audience goes, oh my gosh, is that even possible? I've kind of already alluded to that earlier on, that it is very possible to do a 2 or 3 appointment denture. It's being done every day. Golden Ceramics is doing this day in and day out and have been doing it for some time, using the intraoral scan workflow in a patient's existing denture. So if we think about a patient that comes in for a new denture, we know that a significant number of them are getting a new denture. They're not newly edentulous, right? So if we use their existing denture as a starting point, think about the information that we have with that existing denture. It's a lot. We have the VDO established, usually pretty correctly, right? Their bite could be off a little bit, but we have a pretty accurate VDO. We have a midline established, and we have a lot of information about their existing denture, how it worked for them. Were the phonetics good? Were they biting their cheek? The shape of the teeth, were they happy with the shape of the teeth? So all this information can be captured via the intraoral scanner. And typically, we also know that when a patient comes in for a new denture, it's because their old denture is not fitting as well. Why is that? Probably because they've lost bone. So the adaptation of their existing denture to their tissue and their bone is not good. That is also pretty easily remedied by doing a wash impression. So you take their existing denture, put in some impression material, and do the wash impression to capture their tissue and their bone. You can also do an impression of their opposing and capture their bite with some bite material. So well, the way I like to think about an existing denture workflow, or the copy and reference denture workflow, is to think of it like it's a wax rim with teeth, right? These are the best wax rims you can possibly have are an existing denture. So appointment number one, if you have an intraoral scanner, is so slick. Patient shows up with their existing denture. You do a wash impression, capture their tissue and their bone, scan their opposing, scan the bite, and you send that information to Golden Ceramics. As you can see on the right-hand side of the screen, they import that existing denture scan, and they're basically going to tell their software one of two things. They're either going to copy the existing denture, or they're going to make some changes that you've asked for. So that's a copy denture or a reference denture. So it can be used as a reference point, or it can be copied exactly. You remove the impression material from the patient's denture, patient goes home, appointment number one, with their denture. Appointment number two, if it's a copy denture, no changes are requested. Golden Ceramics can do that accurately, send you the denture, and second appointment can be the final denture delivery. Now, we need to pause here and also go, oh man, for those of you that don't have intraoral scanners, you're thinking, man, I would love to do this, but I have to wait till I have an intraoral scanner. You really don't. You can use a patient's existing denture, do the exact same technique, but since you don't have an intraoral scanner yet, you can send that denture to Golden, and they will scan that denture for you with one of their lab scanners, import that into their software, and they're off to the races with their production process. The only difference is the patient doesn't leave that first appointment with their denture. We need to get that denture back to the patient. Okay? That's the only difference, but you can still participate in this workflow. So the difference between a copy and a reference denture, again, copy denture candidate, we have a pretty retentive denture. It doesn't have to be, the fit and suction don't have to be really good. And we know that most times if a patient's getting a new denture, it's not going to be, but it's somewhat retentive, right? It's not falling out of the mouth. Acceptable occlusion, good phonetics. We want to confirm the VDO, take a bite registration. Patient is pretty happy with the existing denture. They want an upgraded, refreshed denture, basically. They smoke more, or they drink more red wine than they tell you at their hygiene appointments, and they like a brighter shade of denture tooth. You can do that. Reference denture, you're going to make some more a little more complex changes. You're going to move the midline over, you're going to change the shape of the tooth. So I like to do a try-in appointment. We can talk to Ben here in a couple minutes. We're about to move to the Q&A, but I like to do a try-in appointment with the reference dentures, so you have an opportunity to see if those requests that you've asked for are being reflected in the final denture. Another interesting application, we're not just only focused on doing full dentures. We have a lot of edentulous patients, like we talked about in the beginning of this presentation. We know that Golden Ceramics can produce partials, metal-free partials and flippers with this material, much the same way as they're doing these dentures. So here you can see some dentures that have been fabricated here with clasps incorporated for retention. And then you can also see an example of a flipper here, 3D printed denture tooth, no clasps. So don't just think about, or don't only think that you can do full dentures with Golden Ceramics. A lot of your patients that can benefit from partials or flippers, we can use the same workflow. So we're going to wrap it up and move to the Q&A here. So I'm going to pull Ben back in here in just a second, but I like this quote from Henry Ford. I like to bring it back to the evolution and the change of our industry. Henry Ford, we've heard this quote. We know this is so commonsensical and true, but he said this so many years ago about running his company. This was his outlook, right? And the interesting thing about this is that Ford Motor Companies was the first automotive manufacturer to use 3D printed parts on production vehicles, and they did it with a carbon printer, the same printer that Ben and his team at Golden Ceramics are using. So that's a really interesting, kind of full circle moment there. If you haven't seen the evolution of a dental lab technician, it's a stressful job, especially doing all these analog removable steps. This is what the evolution of an analog dental lab technician looks like. And I think it's pretty important to know that there's anecdotal evidence that shows that when we switch to these 3D printed processes, we have the ability to reduce and reverse this awful process. So please help a dental lab tech out. We're all dental lab technicians, in the labs working on these. help us out. Move to this digital process and see if you can help to mitigate these horrible effects of our industry and the stress on us. So just kidding. Like to mess around, pick on dental lab techs. Been one for a long time. Any of you that want any of the references, any of the information that I quoted, any of the stats, please screenshot this. I want to make sure that these didn't just come out of thin air. This is all substantiated. And we're going to go ahead and move to the Q&A. So Ben, I'm going to invite you to pop back in here. And guys, this webinar is scheduled for 1 hour. You're welcome to stay on a little longer if you want to. We're not going to cut this off right at the hour. So if you have questions that aren't answered, or you want to stick around and chat, we'll stick around for 5 minutes or so past the hour. So how you doing, Ben? What kind of
Thank you. I want to say thank you. It was a fabulous hour. I want to just bring up one point when you talked about partials. That's the indication we see the most from scanner owners, because if you own a oral scanner and you're missing 2 teeth and you can scan upper, lower, and a bite, you can get a finished partial for the next appointment. If you're missing up to 3, 4 teeth, for the most part, you don't even need a try-in. If you want one, we'll make one. But we see the biggest application with partials now with oral scanner owners, because it's an easy 2-appointment process.
Awesome. Yeah. Thank you.
What are the questions we have there?
Yeah.
Hey, I'm just going to pop on and read some questions for you all. We do have one that we'll have to sort of wait until we finish that educational portion for, but I have some right now. First, can endonculus lower jaw be scanned? And I think you were sort of just touching on that, Ben.
Yes, so it all depends on the quality of the oral scanner you have. I know between Prime Scan, iTero, 3Shape, they can all scan edentulous today, upper and lower. It will require, we do wax rims off of those or custom trays off of those, but if you're going to wax rim, it will require a wash impression to compress that soft tissue.
Wonderful. And then we have 2 questions that I think they kind of go hand in hand here. Are doctors able to see the final before it's processed, similar to a digital picture, or should the dentist take an analog impression first?
We can definitely do that.
Yeah, absolutely. We can send a design proposal for the doctor to see if they provided us with a reference denture that we use it as a reference. We can provide them with screenshots for them to review the final design of the denture. Yes.
Great. Well, that's all the questions we have that we can answer right now. We do have one about price, which we can get to in a little bit. If we want to show that verification code now, Jamie, we can do that real quick, and then we can get to this next question for Ben.
Okay, sure. So here is our CE course code.
So as a reminder, everyone, go to your CE Zoom account, log in. You'll see scheduled courses. You might have to click a little arrow button to drop down. You'll see that verification code button, it's a green verify button rather, and then you'll enter that code, which is Stover 2023. And I'll put that in the chat box. But real quick, we had a question about money. What's the extra charge for functional try-in in terms of lab fees?
So there's no extra cost for that. It's the same cost as a try-in. So if we take the cost of a denture and we divide it, the way we charge is half of the price at try-in, half at finish. It's the same cost if we give you a regular try-in or functional try-in.
We have 2 more questions that came through. Can the trial denture try-in have some pink gum so patients can evaluate better?
Yes, we can do that. For that, there is an extra cost, but we can definitely stain the gum to look more of a finished denture.
Wonderful. And the last one we have right now is, do we have an option to use conventionally carded denture teeth that can be reliably bonded to the printed base?
Yes, Dentsply has carded teeth that go in our software to match the sockets of the base, and we definitely have that option. Yes.
So that is all the questions we have right now. I guess if anything else comes through, we can answer those. Oh, here we go. Sorry. Considering that the dentures need to function at numerous pressures from none to 25 to 35 pounds, how many adjustments are usual?
Jamie, can you answer that?
So how many adjustments after the final denture is seated? How many adjustment
That's
appointments?
what I think they're asking. See if we can
Okay.
get some clarification, but I guess let's answer it as if the first one.
Sure. I mean, Ben, I mean, what are you guys typically seeing when you guys deliver that final denture? What are you hearing from your dentist? Are most of those
So
fitting with?
usually when we get to the last final denture is after we did the monolithic trine and did all the adjustment that's needed. You know, the doctor has already balanced the bite in the mouth, found the sore spots. We did everything we needed. So we rarely see anything coming after final product to redo anything.
Which again is one of the kind of the drastic changes when we move to this workflow is, you know, we're used to delivering a final denture and then having at least a couple additional adjustment appointments.
Yeah.
Right? And so it's a great question. And I think that's important to note that we really are seeing that instance of those additional adjustment appointments eliminated because, you know, this process is so much more accurate and so much more efficient. Like Ben just said, by the time we get to the final denture, we truly have a final denture that fits as it should and functions as it should. So, yeah.
Awesome. And then we just had a question about the CE code one more time. It is in the chat box for you as well as with instructions. It is Jamie's last name, so Stover 2023. So that is a 0 and not an O. But yeah, so I don't see any other questions here. If you guys want to go over that promo one more time. Yeah,
Ben, did you want to cover it? This is a pretty amazing, I'm thinking about, I don't need a denture, but I'm thinking about just getting one just because it's 50% off.
Yeah,
so I'm like,
we want to offer all our participants 50% off. And I know it doesn't have all the details here, but it's anything digital. If you need a night guard, a flipper, a denture, a duplicate denture, we'll honor this for any process that's a digital product out of our carbon printer.
Awesome. Nice benefit for attending the webinar and getting CE. All right.
Awesome. Well, we have no more questions here. The code's been given out. We have the instructions. And again, if you need any help with that, you can always email us at CEZoom, help@cezoom.com, which is in that chat box. And other than that, I think we are good to call it an afternoon. Thank you both so much. This was wonderful. And, you know, if anyone has any questions for Golden Ceramic Dental Lab, how should they reach you, Ben?
You can reach us at, is it Jim?
info@GCDL.
info@gcdl.net.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much. Thank you again, Jamie. Everyone have a wonderful day.
Thank you all. Appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Ben.
Bye-bye.
Bye, guys.